So like she said, I'm Cadrien. I go to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and my background, I guess, is agricultural and environmental science communications. This is my degree. And then I study public policy and political science along with that. So when people ask me, who I am, what I do, I tell them about that, right? But then a little bit background on my backstory. I also tell them that my mom and I own 300 head of registered Gelbvieh Angus cattle in around O'Neill, Nebraska, it's the northeast part of the state. And then they say, why just your mom and you? Where's your dad? And I guess that's kind of where my story begins. My dad, in 2008, I was 10 years old. I had two little sisters. They were 18 months old and 2 weeks old. And we just had a brand new baby. We were running our ranching operation, our cattle operation, and my dad had just gotten into the farming business. Just a year before that, we had turned some pasture land into corn ground, and he had stored some corn over at the neighbor's place at a grain bin that year. And so in 2008, he was going to the grain bin to go get it out. And this grain bin wasn't a normal grain bin that's the flat side. It was more of a cone shape. It looked like an ice cream cone on the bottom. It had an auger on the bottom of it. And the auger happened to break down. And so he used a grain vac to get the grain out. Like I said before, my dad was not a farmer. He was a rancher. That's kind of a big deal in Nebraska, that difference there. And he didn't really know the dangers of the farming operations or what that all included in the grain industry. And so he went into that grain bin with that grain vac with no protection, no harnesses, nothing. And the truck driver was there with him, and the truck driver happened to step out of the grain bin and went to move the truck forward. And when he came back, all he saw were my dad's hands in the air. My dad had been caught in a grain engulfment and had happened to have an air pocket in the corn, and it collapsed on him. So the rescue team unit was only about 10-15 minutes away at the most, and unfortunately the rescue team didn't have the proper safety equipment nor the proper training to get him out. And so what they thought they could use as the grain vac to help exit his body and kind of get him out there fast. The grain vac was not working because it had been plugged by his handkerchief that my dad was wearing. And so they ended up bucketing out the corn, bucket by bucket. And as you can imagine, time is in the essence when you have a tragedy like that. So they could not get him out in time, and unfortunately, he died. And so that left my mom and I and my two little sisters to the ranch, and I'm very proud of what my mom has done. She's done an amazing job keeping the ranch up along with my help, and my sisters are there to help along the way. So my sisters are now 12 years old and 11 years old, so they're getting up to that point where they can finally help with the cattle operation and do different things like that. But I guess the key takeaways that I wanted you to kind of get from this story was one, that the rescue team unit needed the proper training and they needed the proper equipment, because if that would have been done, his life likely could have been saved. But a second takeaway that I want you to take that is more important to what we're talking about today is that stories can save lives. And if you can tell a story like that, then you're more likely to compel an audience, you're more likely to remember it when you invoke emotion, and you're more likely to save a life because of that story. So I guess one thing I want to talk about just real quick is, why did I choose ag communications? I want people to hear my family's story so it doesn't happen to them, because that's one heartbreaking thing, is when I hear it over and over and over again, because I don't want it to happen to anyone else. So I look at ways to communicate safety to others, and I have a strong passion for safety ever since I was 10 years old, and it's always been a big part of my communication to other people about safety too, and creating safety awareness. And I hope that as I can continue to tell my story and promote safety through my communications work, that people will start to ask the question, how could have this been prevented, and what can I do so that that isn't my family story? That's some of the most important things to think about. So I guess I leave you with this last point before I get to the real experts. Whether it's my story or the numerous other stories you've heard, I challenge you to think of it like your own story. And then say, what can I do to have an impact on safety so that this story doesn't continue to be the trend, so you don't continue to see it in the news and headlines? And how can this story make the difference? So with that, I'll hand it off to Steph.